Welcome to Whispers of Asia. In this place we collect the forgotten, the feared, and the forbidden. Stories born in hushed temple courtyards, whispered under the breath of old women who still remember. Here the dead do not rest quietly, and silence is never empty. Tonight, we take you deep into the mountains of southern Thailand, where a woman grieving the loss of her husband seeks refuge in the stillness of an ancient forest monastery. But what she finds is not peace. It is ritual. It is breathless chanting beneath a cursed Bodhi tree. It is a monk whose eyes never blink, and a silence so heavy it will swallow her whole. This is not just a story about ghosts. It is a story about what happens when the dead want to breathe through you. This is the Whispering Monk of Khao Luang.
The train screeched to a stop at a nameless platform in the hills. There was no announcement, no signboard. Just a rusted bell hanging crookedly from a bamboo pole, and a few monks standing barefoot in the dust, their robes fluttering faintly in the mountain wind. Sita stepped off the train with a duffel bag in her hand, and her grief pressed tight to her chest. She didn't need a sign. She had memorized the name 100 times, Wat Niran Sombat, the Temple of Eternal Stillness, hidden somewhere deep in the Khao Luang range, reachable only by a narrow dirt path through the forest, and known only through word of mouth among those who sought silence, not for peace, but for surrender. The air smelled of wet earth and old incense. Somewhere far off, a bell tolled once, low, ancient, like a sound that had traveled too far to remain whole. She took a breath, trying to steady the nausea that had returned each morning since the accident. Her husband's face still lingered in her sleep, half smiling, half vanished, caught between memory and loss. It had been 3 months since the funeral, and yet the ache inside her felt as fresh as the wound beneath a scab, hidden but raw. A small, hunched man in white robes awaited her at the edge of the platform, holding a wooden placard with her name painted in red ink. He did not speak. He merely bowed once and turned, motioning for her to follow. The path twisted like a snake, winding between towering bamboo groves and dense, whispering pines. Time felt elastic in the forest, stretched thin, then snapping back unexpectedly. Sita lost track of how long they walked. Minutes or hours, it didn't matter. The silence was unbroken, save for the distant chirr of cicadas and the slow, deliberate crunch of sandals on gravel. When the monastery came into view, it appeared not as a structure, but as a shadow. Half buried in mist, it blended into the mountain like something grown from it. Wooden buildings with high slanted roofs leaned against moss-covered stone. The central temple stood silent at the heart of it all, wrapped in creeping vines and flanked by statues of meditating monks, their eyes closed, their faces weathered with centuries of rain. And yet, there was something strange. Each statue had a mouth sewn shut with wire. Sita blinked, unsure if her mind was playing tricks on her eyes. When she looked again, the wires were gone. They led her to the main hall without a word. The silence was sacred, she knew. This was a vipassana retreat, strict and ancient. 10 days of absolute silence. No speaking, no eye contact, no writing, no gestures. No phones, no clocks, no connection to the world outside. Just breath, just stillness, just her and whatever rose to the surface when the noise of the world fell away. Inside the hall, she was greeted by another monk, tall, gaunt, with hollow cheeks and eyes like stone. He did not bow. He simply stared at her as if weighing her spirit against something invisible. A golden sash across his chest marked him as Ajahn Pracharan, the head monk of the retreat. She had read of him. A man who hadn't spoken in 30 years. A man who, according to legend, had once been declared dead for 3 days before returning to life in the temple, murmuring mantras in an ancient tongue. He blinked slowly once, then turned away, his robes trailing like smoke. A novice handed Sita a slip of parchment with a single word painted in bold crimson. Observe. And so it began. Her room was sparse. A single mat, a mosquito net, a wooden bowl for water, a barred window overlooking the forest where the trees swayed even when the wind did not. She unpacked slowly, her fingers lingering on the photograph tucked between her clothes. A faded picture of her and Anand at the beach, his arm draped over her shoulder, his smile soft and lopsided. She placed it beside her mat, facing the wall. Even now, looking at it hurt. A bell rang outside, once, long and low. Evening meditation. She wrapped herself in her shawl and stepped outside. They gathered in the main hall like shadows drawn to candlelight. 30 other participants sat in perfect silence, cross-legged, unmoving. The room was lit only by the golden glow of butter lamps flickering beneath a massive wooden carving of the Buddha. Ajahn Pracharan sat on the high platform, his legs folded beneath him, his eyes closed. He did not move, not once, not even to breathe, it seemed. Sita took her place in the back row and closed her eyes. Inhale, observe. Exhale, observe. The rhythm came easily at first. She had meditated before, but something about this place made the air feel thick, as if every breath carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers. The silence wasn't empty. It was crowded, pressing. Behind her closed eyes, colors began to bloom. Shapes, a flickering light, a dark corridor, footsteps on stone, a whisper close and breathless. Come closer. Her eyes snapped open. No one had spoken. She glanced around. No one moved. No one flinched. She shook her head, heart racing. It was only the mind playing tricks. It always did that on the first day of silence, didn't it? That night, she tried to sleep, but the forest hummed with strange vibrations, as if the mountain itself was breathing beneath her room. She turned to the wall, clutched the photograph to her chest, and shut her eyes. Then she heard it, a voice, not outside, but inside her, faint and layered, like it came from underwater. The dead do not rest here. She sat bolt upright. The room was empty. She was alone. But the silence, it no longer felt like absence. It felt like listening. The morning bell rang long before the sun rose. Its sound did not pierce the silence. It sank into it, low and resonant, as if calling not just the living, but something older, deeper, resting beneath the soil. Sita sat upright on her mat, already half awake, her body sore from the hard floor, and her dream still clinging to her skin like wet cloth. She didn't remember the content of the dream, only the sensation of being watched, as if someone had stood above her, just out of frame, just out of reach, whispering breathless prayers into her ear while she slept. She didn't tell anyone, of course. She couldn't. Silence wasn't optional here. It was law. Wrapped in her shawl, she stepped out into the dim corridor. The hallway was lit only by faint lanterns swinging from wooden beams. Other participants moved like phantoms, barefoot and wordless, their heads bowed as they made their way to the meditation hall. There was no talking, no eye contact, only breath and footfall, only silence. Inside the temple, the air was cold, heavy with incense and something else, something metallic, like rusted bells or old coins in deep water. Ajahn Pra-Rashan sat on the high dais, back straight, palms resting on his knees. He had not changed clothes. Had he ever moved? She studied him as she settled into position. Her robe was a deeper saffron than the others, aged perhaps, or stained. His skin was pale, stretched taut over his cheeks and jaw. His eyes were open, too open. There was no moisture in them, no shimmer, no trace of life. They stared across the hall, unmoving, unblinking, as if carved into stone, as if they had once blinked long ago, but no longer remembered how. She tried to look away, but found her gaze caught in his. Not meeting, never quite that, but near enough that she felt the strange pressure of his presence sliding into her thoughts like fog creeping through cracks. Was he watching her, or was he simply watching everything? The day's first meditation began. She closed her eyes. Inhale, observe. Exhale, observe. But the moment she slipped into stillness, the silence changed. It wasn't peaceful. It was too complete, too thick. The rustle of robes, the coughings, the shifting of limbs, gone. It was as though the others had disappeared and she had been left alone inside a sealed room. And then, tap. A single sound, soft and close, like a finger tapping her shoulder. She opened her eyes. No one near her had moved. The monk still sat like a statue, but his eyes were on her. For the first time, she was sure of it. That afternoon, the schedule required walking meditation in the forest path that circled the monastery. They were to follow a slow rhythm, one step per breath, left, right, left, mindful of each movement, a deliberate ritual to draw the spirit out of distraction. Sita walked with the others, the line curving through towering bamboo, past ancient stone shrines overtaken by moss and roots. Some were cracked, others held offerings, withered flowers, burnt incense, a single blackened apple. As she walked, her mind kept returning to the monk. There was something unnatural in the stillness of his body, the perfect symmetry of his posture, and the absence of movement, not just from his eyes, but his face, his breath even. She had spent hours in rooms with him, and not once had she seen his chest rise. What kind of man did not breathe? She looked around the forest. The other participants did not seem to notice. Their eyes stayed fixed on the path, their hands clasped. No one broke rhythm. No one blinked, just like him. That night, she returned to her room late, her feet numb and her head aching. She didn't know what had changed, only that something had shifted in the air. The forest no longer felt like trees and wind. It felt like a cathedral, abandoned and overgrown, sacred but wrong, silent but listening. She sat on her mat, staring at the floorboards. Then she heard footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate, just beyond her door. She froze. The footsteps stopped. The lantern outside her window flickered, shadows stretched long across the room, and for a moment she thought she saw something standing on the other side of the rice paper door. A silhouette, tall, thin, motionless. Her heart raced, but the figure did not move, did not knock, did not breathe. Then, without a sound, it faded. The next morning she awoke with a strange heaviness in her limbs. Her dreams had been strange: mud, water, chanting. She remembered standing before the Bodhi tree behind the temple, its branches stretching up like fingers into a sky made of smoke. Something had whispered her husband's name into her ear over and over. Anan, Anan, Anan. But it hadn't been her husband's voice. It had been the monk's. The temple library was off limits to retreat guests, but on the fourth day, during the walking meditation, Sita slipped away from the path. She waited until the others turned a bend and then ducked beneath the vines surrounding the side entrance and made her way up the wooden steps into the temple archives. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old palm leaf manuscripts, scrolls, and bound volumes. She scanned the titles, many written in Pali, some in Lana script. She could barely read them, but one stood out, a scroll bound in black twine. It had no label. She untied it carefully and unrolled it on the table. The script was faded but still legible. It wasn't Pali, it was Thai, old Thai, but close enough for her to decipher with effort. The first line chilled her. To carry the soul of the restless, the vessel must be emptied. The rest described a ritual, a series of meditations, not for peace, but for transfer, an offering of breath, a silence so complete that the dead could be drawn in through the gaps between words. The final stage required the guidance of a monk whose soul was no longer entirely his own. She stepped back from the scroll, stomach turning. Was this what Ajahn Prarashan was doing? Was this what the retreat truly was? Before she could read further, a shadow fell over the table. She turned slowly. The monk stood in the doorway, silent, watching, his eyes unblinking. He did not speak, did not move, but something in his gaze pinned her where she stood, like a nail through the heart of a butterfly. She could not breathe, could not think. The scroll slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. The monk stepped forward once, and then she blinked. He was gone. She stumbled out of the library and back toward the dorms, heart pounding, eyes burning. When she reached her room, she fell to her knees and wept silently into the floorboards, clutching the photo of her husband to her chest. What have I come to? She came here to forget death, but it had followed her into the silence, and now it was listening. The sun never truly shone on the monastery. Even when the sky was clear and the light fell across the forest in golden shafts, the trees around Wat Niran Sombat stood too close, their branches knit together like the fingers of the dead holding the mountain in a quiet grip. On the morning of the first formal ritual, marked only by the sound of the second bell tolling 3 times, Sita rose before it rang, already awake, already sweating. Her sleep had been shallow and broken by fragments of voices she couldn't place. Dreams came and went like flickering shadows behind rice paper. But one image stayed. A mouth, wide open, not screaming, breathing, slow and deep, like it was pulling the room into its lungs. She shook the thought away and dressed in the same white robe she'd been given the first night. The cloth was thinner now, damp from days of humidity, and faintly smelled of sandalwood and mildew. She no longer questioned it. Everything here bore that same dual scent, holy and decaying. She stepped into the hallway, joining the procession to the main temple. No one spoke. No one met her eyes. Even now, she couldn't remember the faces of the other participants. They were starting to blur. Same robes, same lowered gazes, same steps like clockwork. It was as if the mountain was sanding them down, smoothing them into something blank. Inside the meditation hall, the lamps had been extinguished. Only natural light filtered through the latticed windows, falling in narrow lines across the floor like slats in a cage. Ajahn Prarachanan was already seated. Of course he was. He sat in the exact position he had always sat. His posture hadn't changed since the day she arrived. His hands rested on his knees. His face was turned ever so slightly downward, as if in reverence or warning. His eyes, dry and unmoving, remained open. Sita couldn't look at him anymore. Every time she did, something hollowed out inside her chest. Today's session was unlike the others. The novices brought in new mats, dark red stitched with spiraling symbols she hadn't seen before. They lined the floor in a perfect circle. In the center, the monk sat beneath a hanging bell. A bowl of dark incense burned in front of him, the smoke curling unnaturally downward toward the floor. Each participant was led to their place. Sita's mat was near the front this time, directly across from the monk. From here she could see it clearly. His pupils didn't move, not when the others entered, not when she sat. They stared ahead into nothing, and yet she felt them on her. The kind of pressure you feel when someone stands just behind you, saying nothing, breathing just loud enough to know they're there. The ritual began without announcement. A novice struck the bell 3 times. Each note hung in the air longer than seemed possible. Then, silence. Not meditative silence, not peaceful. It was expectant. Ajahn Prarachanan raised his hand. He moved. For the first time, Sita saw him make a conscious gesture. His hand lifted slowly, trembling slightly, as if unused to motion. He touched his forehead, then his chest, and finally his lips. The participants followed, silently. Then he inhaled, deeply, and the room followed. One breath. Held. Exhaled. Again. Together now. The monk began to lead them into a breathing rhythm, but this was not vipassana, not the kind Sita had studied before. There were no observations of the breath, no return to center. It was a mantra disguised as breathing, and it had a purpose. Each breath seemed to sync with the monk's own. Inhale, exhale, inhale, hold, exhale. slower and slower, until the room felt like a single lung rising and falling in a temple carved from bone. The air became thick. Sita's head began to swim. On the 10th breath, something shifted. She saw movement. From the corner of her eye, a flicker, like someone crawling across the floor behind the others. She turned. Nothing. Then, again, behind her, this time closer. A shadow, pale and long-limbed, scuttling along the edge of the wall. It moved without sound, like breath sliding through water. She tried to stop breathing, to break the rhythm. She couldn't. Her lungs moved on their own. Inhale, exhale, inhale, hold, exhale. She looked back at the monk. His mouth had opened slightly, not wide, just enough. The sound came next, faint, underneath the breath, layered, echoed. Whispers. Not in Thai, not in any language she knew, but she understood, not with her mind, with her skin. The words sank into her like warm water filling a tub. Her hands trembled, her eyes stung. The voice inside the breath said, "We cannot rest, let us in." Her eyes flew open. The monk's eyes were on her. This time she was certain. He was looking directly at her, no longer across the room, no longer at nothing. And he smiled. It wasn't an expression of peace or kindness. It was relief, as if someone had been knocking for centuries and the door was finally cracking open. The rest of the ritual blurred. Time lost meaning. Somehow she was back in her room. She didn't remember walking there. Her hands were shaking. She looked down. Her robe was stained. Dark patches near her chest, damp, faintly sweet. She touched them, smelled her fingers. Blood. But not hers. She checked her body. No wounds, no pain. Nothing but breath. Still moving, still rhythmic, still not entirely her own. She stumbled into the washing area behind the dormitory. The bamboo walls creaked with wind or something trying to speak through them. She scrubbed the robe until the stains faded to pink, then wrung it out and returned in the pale morning light. The other participants moved around her like ghosts. She passed one, a young man with shaven hair and empty eyes. She whispered, hoarse and desperate, "Did you hear them?" He did not react, not even a flinch, as if she hadn't spoken at all. She looked behind her. Ajahn Prarachanan stood in the shadow of the main hall, unmoving, eyes fixed on the mountain, not blinking. That evening, when she lay down to sleep, she held the photograph of Anand again. But the image had changed. His face looked blurred, distorted as if taken through fog, and his mouth slightly open, like he was mid-breath. The bell tolled at midnight. Not once, but 5 times, sharp, echoing. No other night had sounded like this. Sita woke with a jolt. Her heart was already pounding, her body slick with sweat, her robe clinging to her back. The air in the room felt thinner than before, hollow, as though someone had cracked open the window to the void. She sat up slowly, unsure if what she heard was real or part of a dream. Then she saw the lanterns, dozens of them, floating down the hall, outside her paper door, carried by novices, their faces obscured by the long shadows of their hoods. Their footsteps made no sound. Their robes whispered against the floor like dry leaves. One of them stopped outside her door. He did not knock. He did not speak. But he waited. Sita rose, confused, afraid, yet somehow drawn forward. Her legs carried her before her mind could object. She opened the door and stepped into the corridor. The novice turned. He handed her a black candle, then walked away. She followed, just as the others were doing. Each retreatant emerged from their room, silent, candle in hand, eyes glazed as if still half asleep or half possessed. Together they walked. They made their way up the stone steps at the rear of the monastery, the ones she had noticed but never dared climb. Beyond them stood the ancient ubosat, the original ordination hall. Abandoned, they said, too old, too sacred, too dangerous to disturb. But tonight it was open, and within the monks waited. Ajahn Pra-Rachanan stood at the head of the altar, his back to them, arms raised toward the blackened mural of a dying forest. The walls were painted with scenes of decay, not enlightenment. Corpses rotting beneath banyan trees, monks meditating among skulls, rivers of blood flowing from the mouths of saints. The Bodhi tree in the center of the mural was burning. Sita's candle flickered in her grip. No one told them what to do, but everyone sat in a circle, around the altar, around him. The head monk turned. For the first time, Sita saw his mouth fully open. It was wrong. Not in shape, but in absence. There were no teeth, no tongue, just a dark hollow that seemed to pull at the flame in her hands. Then the chant began. It didn't start from him. It started from the floor. Low at first, like a vibration beneath the wood. Then a voice, then another, then dozens, layered, ragged, spoken in a language that did not belong to any living people. The sound echoed not just in the hall, but in her bones. Her ribcage seemed to tremble with each syllable. Her breath caught in her throat, refusing to pass without struggle. The monk raised his hands again. The novices stepped forward, each one carrying a bowl of black incense, so thick it looked like tar. They lit it from the circle's center, and it burned with a choking sweetness, like flowers left too long in a closed room. The smoke curled low, never rising. It crawled across the floor. When it reached her knees, she felt it, an icy heat, if such a thing existed. Her muscles seized for a second. Her mind reeled. The chanting deepened. She tried to look at the monk, but her eyes were drawn instead to the mural behind him. And there, something moved. The painted Bodhi tree, once still, was shaking. Its branches seemed to flicker, as if animated by the smoke. Faces emerged within its trunk, pale, screaming, stretching against the bark like the dead trying to crawl free. Sita blinked once, twice. The mural was no longer just paint. It was alive. The monks kept chanting. She looked around. No one else moved. No one else flinched. They were all chanting too. Even the other guests. Even the ones who had never spoken. Their lips moved in perfect rhythm with the ancient words. Their eyes remained closed. Their bodies swayed gently as though cradled by a rhythm no one else could hear. Sita's mouth began to move. She wasn't doing it, not consciously, but the words spilled from her lips. The moment they passed her teeth, something entered her. It wasn't violent. It was patient, like smoke filling an empty jar, like breath drawn into a lung that no longer belonged to her. She saw herself, just for a moment, from outside her body, sitting among the others, eyes half shut, candle burning low. Then she was back. The monk lowered his arms. The incense had burned away. The mural was still. The chanting stopped. Just like that. All at once. And no one said a word. Ajahn Prarachanan bowed, and everyone stood. Still wordless. Still entranced. They left the hall one by one in the same silence in which they came. Back in her room, the candle burned out in her hand. She didn't remember walking there. She sat for hours unmoving, as if her body no longer belonged to her entirely. She reached for the photo of Anand, but this time it was gone. In its place lay a single dried Bodhi leaf. It was blackened at the edges, and on its surface, scratched in with something sharp, a word in red. Observe. That night, she dreamed of the monk again. Only now she wasn't watching him. She was inside him, breathing, watching, waiting.
By the 5th day, the silence no longer felt chosen. It felt imposed. Sita had stopped trying to count the hours. Days bled into nights, and time moved like sap, slow, thick, and strangely sweet-smelling. Her thoughts no longer felt like her own. They arrived uninvited, like travelers knocking at a door she didn't remember opening. She sat on her mat for hours without moving. Sometimes she would catch herself staring at a knot in the wood floor for what felt like minutes, only to blink and realize an entire bell cycle had passed. Her breath had changed. It moved on its own now, deeper, longer, like her lungs had learned a new rhythm, a sacred rhythm, a borrowed rhythm, and her body followed it like a vessel learning its shape. That morning when she emerged from her room, the dormitory was quiet. Too quiet. It was always silent, yes, but never empty. She stepped into the hallway and noticed every door along the corridor was shut. That was normal. But something wasn't. The shoes. They were gone. All of them. 30 pairs of sandals and slippers, once neatly lined outside the rooms, had vanished. Only hers remained, alone near the door like a brave marker. She felt her chest tighten. Sita moved cautiously down the hallway and peeked into one of the rooms. Empty. Mat rolled up, candle gone, no belongings, no robe hanging from the peg. She checked another. Same. A third. Bare. She began to move faster now, heart pounding, her robe brushing against the wall as she tried each door. Every room was empty. Every one. As if the retreatants had never existed, or had finished something she hadn't. She ran to the common room, hoping for a sign, a whisper, even a glance from a novice. But it too was empty. The urn still steamed, the tea was still warm, the mats were freshly arranged, but no one was there. She opened the wooden doors to the courtyard. No footsteps in the dirt. No sound but wind rustling through the prayer flags overhead. Even the birds had stopped singing. When she turned back, she nearly screamed. Ajahn Prarachan stood in the corridor behind her, silent, motionless, watching. Sita's breath caught in her throat. She bowed instinctively, trembling, unable to speak even if she were allowed to. Her eyes dropped to the floor. When she looked up, he was gone. She retreated to her room, slamming the paper door shut behind her.
Her candle sat unlit on the shelf. Her mat remained, her robe, her bag. But something had changed. The photograph was back, right where she'd left it. Only now, there were two people in it. She and a nun. And behind them, a figure. Tall, shrouded, faceless. She didn't remember that figure being there. Her hand trembled as she lifted the photo. The ink seemed wet, fresh like it had just been printed. Her fingertips smeared the edge slightly, and for a split second, the faceless figure almost looked like it was smiling. That night, she did not sleep. She lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the wind shift through the forest. Except, it wasn't wind. It was chanting. Very faint, almost imagined, but there. A murmur beneath the floorboards, a breath beneath the walls, words in a tongue her mind didn't know, but her bones somehow remembered. She stood and listened. The sound wasn't coming from the temple. It was coming from below. She opened her door. The hallway was still empty. Every door was closed. She crept barefoot down the corridor, candle in hand, until she reached the end of the hall where the wooden steps descended into the lower dormitory, a floor they were told not to enter. It had been sealed off since the fire years ago, they said, but the lock on the gate was broken, hanging loose. She pushed the door open. The darkness breathed out to greet her. The staircase creaked with every step, each board moaning like it remembered a weight heavier than hers. The air below was thick and damp, heavy with mildew and something fainter, something metallic. As she reached the base of the stairs, her candle flickered. A single hallway stretched ahead, lined with small wooden rooms, their doors slightly ajar. The first one held nothing but a mat. The second, dust and bones of moths. The third, she stopped. Someone was sitting inside, facing the wall. White robe, shaved head, motionless. Sita stepped forward. "Excuse me." She froze. The rule, she'd broken it. But the figure didn't move. She stepped closer. Her candlelight touched his back, and she saw it. His robe was old, too old, faded and stained, not white but gray. And his skin was like rice paper soaked in ink, wrinkled, dried, translucent. A corpse, sitting upright, still breathing. She gasped and stepped back, but bumped into someone. She spun around. Another figure stood behind her, then another, then another. The hallway was filling with them, all seated, all facing away, all silent. Dozens of retreatants, not gone, not missing, just left behind, locked beneath the monastery, left to sit in eternal silence. Vessels. She turned and ran. Back up the stairs, through the corridor, past her room. She burst through the side exit into the forest, her candle extinguished by the wind, her bare feet slapping against the wet earth. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the Bodhi tree grove. There she collapsed to her knees, sobbing, gripping the cold moss beneath her fingers. And behind her, a whisper. Not in her ears, but in her mouth, her own voice, whispering the chant from the night before, without her permission, without her will. Silence is holy. That was the first rule written in the retreat handbook. Sita had read it when she arrived. Back then, it felt like a principle, something peaceful, something meditative, a boundary meant to heal. Now it felt like a threat. It was no longer a practice, it was a command. and something was always listening to make sure she obeyed. She hadn't spoken since the night she whispered in the basement dormitory. Just one word, "Excuse me," barely audible. But ever since, something had changed. She felt it immediately when she returned to her room. The walls felt closer, the air tighter, the shadows longer. Her reflection in the small metal mirror by her mat no longer mimicked her precisely. There was a delay, half a second, sometimes more, like the person on the other side was waiting, watching, deciding when to follow. The next morning, her journal was gone. It had been hidden in the folds of her bag, a small leather-bound notebook she'd secretly brought against the rules. Inside, she'd written only 4 pages, observations, questions, things that felt wrong. Now, it was missing. In its place lay a folded slip of parchment. It read, "The breath you speak with is no longer yours." At breakfast, the other retreatants returned. Their dorm doors were open again. Sandals lined the hallway neatly once more. Faces moved silently through the courtyard like ghosts pretending to be human. But something was different. They did not look at her. Before, they at least acknowledged her presence, with a bow, a glance, a shared silence. Now they walked past as if she were air, or less than air. Like she'd broken a rule that no one ever explained, but everyone felt. She tried to speak again once, just to test the air. Alone in the forest, beneath the old Bodhi tree, she opened her mouth and whispered Anand's name, just his name, and the wind died. The birds stopped, even the insects silenced, and from somewhere within the roots of the tree she heard a groan, deep, not human, not animal, like the mountain itself warning her with breathless contempt. A second voice joined hers, faint, from her mouth, echoing her whisper, mimicking her grief. But it wasn't Anand's name it repeated, it was hers. Sita. She no longer dared to speak, not even in thought. Even her inner voice felt compromised. Her prayers began to echo inside her skull as if answered before she finished them. Her grief felt diluted, spread thin like oil across water. That night, she watched the others meditate in the hall, their breathing now perfectly synchronized. One sound, one rhythm, 30 lungs rising and falling in unison. She did not join them. She stood at the doorway, just beyond the candlelight, and watched. And in the center, Ajahn Pra-Rachan, still, eternal, unblinking, but something new now. His lips moved, only slightly. No sound came, no breath, but he could read them. They whispered the same phrase over and over, slow and deliberate. No voice, no self, no escape. Later that evening, she returned to the mirror in her room. She lit a candle, looked into it, and waited. Her reflection stared back, tired, pale, lips cracked. Then it smiled. Sita did not. The reflection raised its hand. She did not move. Then, in a fluid, smooth motion, it mouthed the words, "We are almost ready." She threw the mirror against the wall. It shattered. The pieces didn't scatter randomly. They landed in a perfect circle. She did not sleep that night. She sat with her back to the door, holding the broken frame in her lap, watching her own warped reflections dance in the candlelight. None of them looked like her anymore. The next day, the novice came to her door. He was the same one who had greeted her on the platform, still silent, still small, his head bowed as he handed her a slip of black parchment. It read, You have been chosen for the ritual of inheritance. Day 8. Prepare your breath. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Her mouth moved, her throat strained, her lungs pushed. No sound, only breath, only silence. She clutched her throat in panic. The novice bowed once, then turned and left. She ran to the temple library. She knew she shouldn't. She didn't care. She pushed open the side doors and returned to the old scrolls. The black-wrapped one was gone, but another sat in its place, smaller, bound in red twine, no title. She opened it. Inside, drawings. Diagrams of monks seated in circles, each connected by lines flowing into a single figure, open-mouthed, screaming without sound. The ritual. She turned the page. Text. On the 8th day, the vessel's voice is stolen, so the dead may speak without resistance. Those who resist crack. Those who accept disappear. The monk is not a man, he is a mouth. The page turned red, not ink, but bleed through, fresh. She slammed the book shut and stumbled back. From the shadows, a whisper, not from the room, but from inside her head. No more words, only breath, and breath belongs to us. She left the library in silence, not from discipline, but because she had no choice. Her voice was gone, completely, stolen, and something else was already practicing with it. By the 7th day, Sita no longer recognized her own silence. It wasn't just the absence of speech. It was the absence of self. Her thoughts came slowly now, like breath through cloth. Her memories flickered like distant lamps in fog. She remembered her name, but not the sound of it. She remembered Anand's voice, but not his face. And when she tried to remember the color of her mother's eyes, nothing. The silence was consuming her, patiently, gently, like a blanket pressed over the mouth of a sleeping child. The monks summoned her just before sunset. No bell, no knock, a simple slip of paper under her door. It is time. She dressed slowly. Her robe, once white, had dulled to a sickly gray. Her body moved like it belonged to someone else, like it was borrowing her shape. The sun was bleeding across the sky when she stepped outside. A novice waited by the steps, his face hidden beneath a hood too large for his small frame. Without a word, he turned and led her away from the dormitories, past the main hall, beyond the Bodhi grove, to a part of the monastery she had never seen before. A stone stairwell carved into the hillside, overgrown, forgotten. At its entrance, a wooden sign in ancient Lana script, nearly unreadable. She squinted in the fading light and deciphered 3 words: path to breathless gate. They descended in silence. The walls closed in, damp and pulsing with the weight of earth. Moss dripped from the ceiling. The smell of mold and old incense grew stronger with every step. And then, suddenly, the passage opened into a vast underground chamber. She stopped breathing. The air was thick, almost liquid. Her candle wouldn't stay lit. And in the center of the stone floor was a circle, carved, precise, filled with ash. Around it, 7 monks sat, hooded, silent, unmoving. Ajahn Prarachan stood behind them, taller than before, his eyes closed, his hands folded in prayer. He opened his mouth, and for the first time, he spoke. But the words didn't come from his throat. They came from beneath the floor, from every crack, every wall, from the circle itself. 100 voices, all speaking in unison.
The vessel has been purified. She no longer carries her own name. She is ready.
Sita stepped back, but her feet wouldn't move. She tried to scream, but her mouth was sealed, not physically, but utterly silenced. The monk raised one hand. She dropped to her knees. They began the ritual. The monks around her inhaled deeply, then exhaled a thick, dark smoke that poured from their mouths. Not mist, not incense, but something alive. The smoke slithered into the air and curled toward the circle. Ajahn began to chant, syllables that didn't belong in this world, words that cracked the walls of her thoughts. Sita felt something inside her unravel, a thread pulled loose, a memory lost. Anand's name vanished from her mind like a dream dissolved by waking. She reached for it, panicked, but it was gone. Gone. The smoke reached her body and entered her lungs. It didn't burn. It cooled. And then she remembered dying. Not her death, but someone else's. A man falling from a tree, neck snapping, breath cut short. A child drowned in a jar of rainwater. A woman smothered by her sister during a fever. She felt it all, not like visions, but like memories, as if they had always belonged to her. Dozens of deaths, dozens of final breaths, all filling the space where her voice used to live. Ajahn knelt in front of her. His face was no longer serene. It was hungry. He leaned in until their foreheads touched, and then he whispered, "You carry them now." Her eyes widened. Behind him, the monks began to wail, softly, without opening their mouths, a haunting, breathless lament that seemed to come from inside her chest. She was shaking. Her hands, they were not hers. Thin, gray, veined, like the hands of an old man. She looked down. One by one, the fingers shifted, flickered, changed. 1,000 hands inside her skin, trying to find a way out. She screamed. This time it came out, but it wasn't her voice. It was dozens, layered, echoed, male, female, old, young, crying, moaning, chanting. And then, silence. The monks stopped. The smoke cleared. Ajahn stood. He looked down at her with reverence. "The inheritance is complete," he said. Then he turned and walked away. The others followed, vanishing into the mist, leaving Sita alone, sitting in a pool of ash, mouth open, eyes blank, breathing, but no longer just for herself. She didn't remember walking back. She awoke in her room at dawn, sitting upright on her mat, her hands folded in her lap, her mouth slightly open. The mirror on her wall was whole again. She walked to it and looked in. Dozens of faces flickered behind her own, in the eyes, in the shadows, in the way her lips twitched without her command. Then, faintly, her reflection whispered, "We are Sita." The Bodhi tree was older than the temple. That was what one of the novices had whispered to her on the first night, before the silence took hold. Back then, it meant little, a curiosity, a spiritual footnote. But now, After the ritual, it meant everything. Because the tree wasn't just a symbol, it was a vessel, a mouth, a heart, a grave, and Sita could feel it calling to her. She wandered into the grove at dusk, barefoot, her robe brushing against the dew-soaked grass. The sun had dipped just behind the hills, turning the sky a sickly orange. Long shadows stretched across the stone pathways like fingers pointing toward the roots. No one had followed her, but she was not alone. The air shimmered here, even when still. The tree rose tall in the center of the clearing, its trunk wide and gnarled, bark cracked like dry skin. Its leaves were black at the tips, as if scorched. Ribbons of faded silk still hung from its lowest branches, some so old they had fused with the bark. She stood before it. The roots were massive, twisting into the earth like snakes trying to dig their way out. As she stared, she realized they weren't all roots. Some were bones, jutting out at angles too sharp, too deliberate. Fingers, jawlines, a spine curved unnaturally, woven into the soil. She took a step back, and the wind began to hum. The sound was low at first, like a breath caught between words. Then it rose, layered with whispers. She turned. The clearing had filled with figures, not people, not monks. They wore the robes of the retreatants, but their feet didn't touch the ground. Their mouths were sewn shut, not with thread, but with silence itself. Their eyes were black hollows, and yet she could feel them watching her with hunger. One by one, they began to sway. The same motion, side to side, a ritual without sound, a dance of the dead. And then the tree began to bleed. From a crack in its trunk, a thick black resin oozed, slow and tar-like, glistening in the fading light. It smelled like burnt herbs and old breath. As it touched the ground, it hissed, steaming against the roots. And from that steam, they emerged. Children first, small, fragile, transparent, eyes wide with terror or memory, then the old, spines bent, mouths gasping, then others, men, women, faces blurred, robes torn, their bodies stitched together with shadow. They formed a circle around her, like petals blooming around a poisoned flower, and one stepped forward. Anan. He looked just as he had in her dreams, eyes soft, shirt stained with blood from the crash, his hand outstretched. But his mouth, it moved on its own, soundless, caught in a constant cycle of inhaling and exhaling, breathing her name without air. Sita! Her knees buckled. He came closer, closer. She reached out. But as their fingers touched, his face changed, melted, collapsed inward, revealing another face beneath, a John's, smiling. And then Sita screamed, but no sound came, only breath, only smoke. The spirits inhaled it eagerly, swaying faster, their movements trembling with hunger. The Bodhi tree pulsed now, its branches curled downward, leaves shivering. The black resin had pooled at the base, seeping into the soil, forming symbols, circles, spirals, eyes. And then the voices came, not from the figures, not from the tree, but from within her. They rose up her throat, not her own words, but dozens of others. Let me in, let me speak, let me breathe again. She covered her mouth, fell to her knees. Tears streamed down her face, not from fear, but from grief, because somewhere in those voices she heard her husband's final breath. She curled against the roots, sobbing, and then, softly, someone knelt beside her. A child, no older than 10, a girl translucent, her hands folded in prayer. She pressed her small palm to Sita's cheek and whispered, without moving her mouth, "We are waiting for you to stay." Sita looked into the girl's eyes. They weren't eyes at all. They were mirrors, and in their reflection she saw herself, sitting beneath the Bodhi tree, mouth open, eyes blank, surrounded by the others. Another spirit, another whisper, another inheritance. When she awoke, it was morning. She was back in her room. Her robe was damp, her hands stained with ash. The mirror on her wall no longer reflected her face, only the tree. Always the tree.
Ajahn Achan Prarachan did not blink, not once. Sita had watched him for days, long before she realized what he was. She had stared into those unblinking eyes across meditation halls, through clouds of incense, under the flickering candlelight of midnight rituals. But now she knew why. His eyes weren't windows to the soul. They were locks, keeping something in, or keeping something out. On the 9th day, Sita stopped pretending to be part of the retreat. She no longer joined the morning meditations. She no longer bowed to the novices. She no longer followed the bell, because she knew now this place wasn't a sanctuary. It was a mouth, always open, waiting to swallow. And she had to find its throat. She followed him, Ajahn Achan Prarachan. She waited until twilight, when the shadows grew long and the other retreatants moved like ghosts toward the Bodhi grove. He did not go with them. Instead, he turned toward the mountainside, toward a path that led behind the outer wall, an area she'd never seen, a gate she'd never dared approach. Tonight, she did. She kept her distance, walking barefoot, stepping over moss and crumbling stone, her heart pounding with every breath. The gate was iron, old and half devoured by rust. Ajahn passed through without touching it. It opened for him. Beyond was a staircase carved directly into the stone, spiraling down into the heart of the mountain. Sita followed, step by step. The air changed, grew colder, wetter. The stone walls narrowed, the silence thickened, and at the bottom, a door. It was carved from bone, not wood. Bone. Human. Thousands of finger bones arranged like scales, pressed together to form a shrine of silence. In the center of the door, a single eye. It blinked. Sita gasped. The door opened. Inside was a chamber that should not have existed. It was massive, too large to be under the mountain, too vast. The ceiling disappeared into darkness. The walls curved like the inside of a skull. Thousands of candles floated mid-air, unmoving, each held by invisible hands. And at the center, a well, circular, deep, lined with black stone. Ajahn Achan Prarachan knelt before it. He bowed once, then opened his eyes, and Sita saw the truth. His eyes weren't human. They were glass. Behind them,
countless faces flickered. Not memories, not thoughts, souls. All staring out, all screaming without sound, all trapped behind the thin surface of his gaze. He was not a man. He was a prison, a vessel older than any name carved on the monastery walls. And the well was how they entered. She crept closer. The well pulsed softly like a sleeping heart. Ajahn reached into his robe and withdrew a scroll, old, blood-stained, frayed at the edges. He unrolled it across the ground. The language wasn't Thai. It wasn't any language of the living. It was written in breath, not ink. Breath, trapped, condensed, bound to the parchment. Each symbol exhaled when he traced it with his hand, and with every breath, the air grew colder. Sita's lips trembled, her lungs tightened. The well began to whisper. She moved around the edge of the chamber, trying to stay unseen, but the candles flickered toward her presence like insects sensing heat. She reached the far wall. There she found it, a mural, faded, carved deep into stone. It depicted the history of the monastery, the truth. At the center, the Bodhi tree, but twisted, bleeding. Beneath it, monks knelt in a circle around a single figure, a woman, arms raised, mouth open. From her throat spilled black smoke, from her eyes, faces, and beneath her feet, script, the first vessel. Sita staggered back. A second mural followed. Ajahn standing among ashes, alone, his eyes filled with flames. Behind him, rows of retreatants, their mouths sewn shut with gold thread, their bodies slouched but breathing. Endless. The chamber began to hum. Ajahn rose from the scroll. He turned and saw her. Sita froze, his eyes, still unblinking, locked onto hers. And then he smiled. But it wasn't the smile of recognition. It was relief, like the final piece had arrived. He raised one hand, not in threat, in invitation. The well behind him opened wider, cracks forming around its rim, revealing teeth, rows of them. And inside, breath, alive, moving, waiting. Thousands of voices rose in unison. She sees, she remembers, she is ready. Sita ran, up the stairs, through the gate, back into the forest. The mountain screamed behind her, low and deep, like something enormous groaning in its sleep. And as she fled, one thought beat louder than the rest. Ajahns' eyes never close, because if they did, the souls would escape. By dawn, Sita's breath no longer felt like her own. It came in strange rhythms, slow, deep, then suddenly sharp, ragged. Sometimes she would catch herself mid-exhale and wonder, who's breathing now? Not her, not fully, not anymore. The wind that swept through the monastery that morning carried no scent. No birds called from the trees, no insects hummed. The entire mountain had quieted itself, as though the forest was holding its breath, waiting. A novice came to her door without knocking. His face was pale, unreadable. In his hands, a folded robe, not white, but black, with crimson threads lining the collar. He handed it to her with lowered eyes. No words were spoken. There was no need. She understood. The ritual was tonight, the final one. She changed without protest. Her fingers trembled as she tied the sash. The black fabric felt cold, as if it had been stitched in shadow. When she pulled the robe fully over her shoulders, a sudden stillness filled the room. Even her heartbeat slowed. Even the spirits inside her stilled. It was not comfort, it was submission. Outside, the sky had turned the color of old parchment, dim, yellowed, bruised by clouds. The Bodhi tree stood in the center of the monastery, like a monument to something older than memory. Its branches swayed without wind, and at its base, the monks were waiting. Ajahn stood at the center. His eyes locked on hers the moment she stepped into the courtyard, still unblinking, still eternal. He raised his hand. The bell rang once. The others began to chant, the ritual of breath offering. She had read of it in a forbidden scroll now lost to fire, a rite once practiced only by forest monks who wished to become vessels for the unresolved dead. But this was different. This was not to house the dead. It was to feed them, to nourish their unrest, to keep the cycle eternal. The retreatant sat in concentric circles around her, heads bowed, mouths slightly open, whispering in unison. Breathing in, breathing out, breathing her. Ajahn motioned for her to sit. She obeyed. In the center of the circle, beneath the Bodhi tree, a shallow bowl was placed before her, carved from bone, stained dark with age. The incense lit inside it burned black. No smoke rose, only a shimmer in the air, like heat above flame. She inhaled, and everything changed. The world blurred, not like a dream, but like a membrane breaking. She no longer saw with her eyes, but with her skin, her bones, her soul. The ground pulsed with memory. The tree whispered her name, and the bowl before her began to glow. Inside it, shapes formed, faces, mouths, lungs, breath incarnate. Ajahn knelt across from her. For the first time, he spoke aloud, but not with a voice, but with all of them. Thousands of souls speaking at once. Let go, child of grief. Open your breath. You belong to us now. She wanted to resist. She tried to stand, but her body had forgotten rebellion. Her lungs expanded without her command, and from her mouth a deep guttural exhale poured out, so long and heavy it felt like it took years. The monks inhaled it eagerly. Their chests rose as hers fell. Their eyes rolled back in ecstasy. They were drinking her. She felt her thoughts drain. Anand's name dissolved. Her parents' faces blurred. Her childhood erased. She gasped, trying to pull it back, but the next exhale took her name with it. She heard it whispered into the circle, Sita, followed by laughter. Dozens of voices, children, women, dying men, all chuckling softly as if mocking her futile grip on identity. She clutched her chest, tried to scream, but nothing came, only breath. The Bodhi tree loomed above. Its branches quivered. Leaves began to fall, slowly at first, then in torrents, each one whispering words as they touched the ground. A storm of prayers, a rain of forgotten names. Ajahn stood, his hands lifted toward the sky, and the ritual reached its crescendo. The final offering. She knew what it was. Willingness. The moment when the vessel no longer resists, when the breath becomes prayer, when silence becomes surrender. Ajahn knelt again. His forehead touched hers. His eyes open, burning. His breath poured into her, thick, warm, sweet. And inside it, a memory not hers. A woman screaming as she's buried alive. A monk watching her suffocate, unmoved. Then silence. Then Ajahn's face, unchanged for centuries. He had done this before, over and over. Sita's breath caught, and something inside her rebelled. A flicker, a spark, not a memory, a choice. She clenched her jaw, refused to exhale. Her body trembled. Ajahn's eyes narrowed. The monks around her hissed, but she held the breath, held it until her vision blurred, until blood pulsed in her ears, until the tree itself shook. And then she screamed. It ripped through her like lightning, a scream not of voice, but of breath denied. It shattered the circle. Monks collapsed. The bowl cracked. The Bodhi tree groaned, splitting down the trunk. Ajahn stumbled back. His eyes flickered, just once. For the first time, he blinked, and the souls trapped behind his gaze began to bleed through. Sita collapsed to the ground, gasping, her chest burning, but her breath was hers again. And somewhere deep inside the Bodhi tree, something shrieked and then fell silent.
Sita awoke to the sound of chanting, not from outside, from within. At first, it was just a hum behind her ribs, low, rhythmic, almost soothing. Then it grew louder, rising through her chest, curling up her throat like smoke. She clutched her mouth. The voice was not hers. She sat alone in her room, knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on the mirror across the floor. Her reflection swayed slightly, even though she did not move. It smiled when she didn't. Then it spoke, softly, clearly. "He's still inside you." Sita crawled toward the mirror, breath shallow, voice lost. But the voice didn't stop. "They all are." The ritual of the night before had not destroyed the bond. It had cracked it, weakened the seal, but not ended it. The dead had already entered. They had made a home in her, and now they were waking up. All day her body betrayed her. She tried to walk, but her feet moved in unfamiliar rhythms, slow, then suddenly fast, then slow again, as though remembering different lives. She reached for her cup and found her hand writing on the floor instead, words she couldn't read, in ink she did not own. A prayer, maybe, or a curse. Her voice returned, but not as she remembered it. At breakfast, when the novices passed, her mouth opened against her will, and she whispered, gently, lovingly, "You'll join us soon." She hadn't meant it, hadn't even thought it. The novice stopped, looked at her face pale, then hurried away. Sita sat frozen, her breath trembling. That afternoon she sought solitude beneath the trees. She found herself drawn not to the Bodhi grove, but to the old stone shrine near the southern ridge,
the one half swallowed by vines and cracked with time. As she approached, she felt it again, the whispers, not around her, not beside her, but through her. Each breath became a syllable, each heartbeat a sentence. An old man's voice, "She buried me before dawn." A young girl's sob, "They forgot my name." A dry rasp, "I died alone in the prayer hall. My body still sits there." Sita dropped to her knees, covering her ears, but the voices didn't stop, because they weren't outside her. They lived inside her lungs now, and breath meant speech. At night she tried to stay awake, tried not to sleep, but exhaustion claimed her, and in the dark she spoke, unconsciously, whispering in her sleep. The entire dormitory echoed with her voice, though no one came to stop her. No one dared. The words weren't Thai, not fully. They twisted ancient dialects, Pali, Khmer, and Sanskrit, into something primal. Her roommate fled. She woke to find her mat empty, the door wide open, a trail of ashes leading out. She followed them, only to find the girl sitting beneath the Bodhi tree, motionless, hands folded, eyes open but empty, breathing, but nothing else. She told Ajahn. She meant to. She entered the main hall at dusk when he sat alone, as always, in perfect stillness. But the moment she tried to speak, her mouth moved without her will, and the words came in a dozen tones, layered on top of one another. "We thank you, Ajahn. We live well in this one. Your gate remains open." Ajahn's lips curled into a slight smile. Then he said nothing, because he didn't need to. She was already too far gone. That night she tried to write, tried to anchor herself. She scrawled her name across the wall, Sita, over and over, until her hand changed, until the pen turned, until her fingers wrote something else. Ajahn was the first to invite us, but she is the last we need. She collapsed on her mat, eyes wide, breath shallow. The mirror on the wall flickered again, not with one reflection, but with many. Her face shifted with every blink. A child, an old man, a crying mother, a monk, all of them her, none of them hers. They spoke in her voice now. She was the instrument, the altar, the windpipe of the mountain. And somewhere in that whirlwind of fragments, she heard him, Anan, faint, wounded, buried. He whispered from the depths of her breath, "I'm still here." Sita gasped, and for the first time in days, she sobbed, not from fear, but from something worse, the terrible, undeniable truth. She didn't know which voice was truly hers anymore. The mountain was not still. It breathed. It groaned in its depths, a low, constant sound that could only be heard if you were very quiet and very alone. By the 12th day, Sita could hear it all the time. It pulsed beneath her feet as she walked. It echoed in the stones. It rose in her bones every time she inhaled, a deep vibration that sounded like a chant slowed down to the rhythm of the earth. It was alive, and it was hungry. That morning she found the novice, the small one who had first welcomed her. He was lying beside the Bodhi tree, still breathing, but barely. His skin was gray, his eyes blank. His mouth moved silently, as if repeating something in a loop.
She knelt beside him and touched his hand, cold, not like death, more like stone. Then he looked at her for the first time, and he whispered, "They kept burning us so the monk could live." She fled to the forest, away from the dormitory, away from the tree, away from mirrors and incense and faces that weren't hers. She didn't know where she was running until she saw it. A break in the trees, a slope of crumbling rock, a collapsed entrance to what once must have been an ancient part of the monastery. She crawled through the rubble and found it. The furnace. The room was wide and circular, carved deep into the mountain stone. Its walls were blackened, charred. Bones littered the floor, small ones, large ones, some fused into the melted rock. At the center, a pit, still warm, still breathing. And beside it, stacks of robes, hundreds, folded, pressed, stained, white, black, red. Every color worn by every retreatant who had ever entered. Sita stared in silence. The fire had never gone out, not once. She moved toward the far wall where an altar stood, built from melted relics. Golden Buddha heads fused into a single monstrous form, its mouth wide open, as if screaming. Above it hung a plaque, cracked and barely legible. She traced the carving. 3 words in old script: Eternal Transference Engine. Her knees gave out. This place, this monastery, was not for peace, not for meditation, not even for ritual. It was a system, a machine, fueled by breath, maintained by sacrifice. The retreatants were offerings, each one silenced, each one emptied, their souls distilled, their bodies burned, their breath fed into the ajahn, the eternal vessel, the monk who never blinked because his body was no longer entirely flesh, but memory, smoke, bone, and fire. And now, so was she. Sita stumbled backward and fell against a wall. Her hand landed on something sharp. She looked down. It was a jawbone, split clean, teeth cracked, tongue still dried inside the cage of bone. The jaw whispered, "Burn us all. Free us." That night, she returned to her room, but she no longer feared the mirror. She looked into it and saw them all, faces shifting like water, layered, silent. They weren't angry, they weren't cruel. They were tired, exhausted from generations of serving a ritual that never ended. And now they wanted her to finish it, to do what none before her had dared. She waited until the monastery slept. Then she lit a single black candle. She walked barefoot, robe dragging behind her down the stone path to the furnace chamber once more. The air trembled. The fire pulsed. The pit was open, glowing dimly. She held the candle over it, but the flame wouldn't drop. It clung to the wick, like breath refusing to be released. She closed her eyes and whispered, "If I die tonight, let me take the mountain with me." Then she opened her mouth and exhaled. The candle surged, the pit ignited. A roar rose from the depths of the stone, deeper than sound, heavier than memory. The walls shook, the bones cried out, and far above, Ajahn Pra-Rachanan awoke, eyes wide, finally blinking. He screamed, and across the monastery, every mirror shattered, every retreatant fell. The Bodhi tree split at its center, black sap pouring from its heart, and the fire beneath the mountain burned white. A cleansing flame,
A final breath. When it was done, Sita lay on the ground beside the furnace, smoke rising from her chest. Her robe charred, her lungs empty, but her eyes open, and her voice hers again. She whispered one last time, "I remember who I am."
The fire did not kill her. It cleansed her. At least, that's what the voices said. Sita lay on the cold stone floor beside the furnace, eyes open, breath shallow, the scent of ash clinging to her skin. The smoke had not touched her robes, yet she smelled burnt. Inside, like something within her had smoldered quietly. And now, there was only silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of decision. She walked through the monastery like a ghost. The halls were empty. No novices, no retreatants, no chanting. The Bodhi tree was cracked open at its center, a gaping wound dripping black sap into the earth. The silk offerings had turned to ash. The wind whispered through hollow branches, like breath escaping a dying mouth. She looked up and saw the mountain sky, clear, blue, untouched by ritual, as if the fire beneath the stone had never burned. But she knew better. She had burned, and what survived was not the same woman who arrived. Ajahn Prahrachan waited for her, at the center of the main hall, alone, seated on the high platform, his posture perfect, his robes unblemished, his face serene. But his eyes, they blinked now, slowly, painfully, as if each closing of the lids tore open a wound. They had never been meant to shut. He looked at her not with control, but with pleading. He was no longer the master of this place. He was a prisoner, and she held the key. Sita stepped forward. He opened his mouth, and for the first time he spoke in only his voice. No echoes, no layers, no dead. Just one man, ancient, tired, hollow. The fire only burns what refuses to be offered. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder now than his words ever could. He bowed his head and whispered, "You must finish it." At the base of the altar sat a single scroll, bound in red thread, thin, fragile. She picked it up, unrolled it, and read. It was a closing rite, one last chant, a ritual not to pass the burden on, but to end it, a forbidden act, a reversal of the inheritance, a severing of the breath line. But it required a sacrifice, not of life, not of blood, but of voice, forever. To end the cycle, she had to choose silence, not as discipline, but as obliteration. She would walk this earth unheard, unnamed, unremembered, her soul unanchored, her story never told, a wandering echo in the spaces between lives. But the dead would be free. The monks would crumble. Ajahn would finally close his eyes, and the mountain would rest. She sat across from him. The Bodhi tree groaned in the distance. The ash stirred in the wind. And she whispered the first word of the chant, breath, and the ground trembled. She whispered the second, memory. Ajahn wept. The retreatants' rooms collapsed one by one behind her. She whispered the third, return. Her lungs constricted, her heart slowed. The voices inside her screamed, then fell silent. Not gone,
but released, freed into the wind, into the roots, into the soil. And when she opened her mouth again, nothing came out. Not a sound, not a breath. Only silence, complete, permanent. Ajahn lowered his head, his eyes closed for the final time. His body crumbled to dust. The scroll vanished in her hands, and the hall collapsed. Sita walked from the wreckage, alone. She passed the cracked Bodhi tree. The black sap no longer flowed. The air was still, the sky vast. The mountain no longer groaned beneath her feet. It slept, and she too was quiet. A silence no ritual could ever break. A silence she had chosen.
The mountain is quiet now. No chants echo in its valleys. No bells ring at dawn. The Bodhi tree stands split, its roots slowly hardening into stone, the black sap dried to dust. The monastery is a ruin. The fire beneath it has gone cold. But silence still lives here. It moves through the broken halls like a shadow with memory. It watches from behind shattered windows. It breathes without lungs, and it waits. Weeks pass, then months. The trail that once led to Wat Niran Sambat becomes overgrown. The train no longer stops. Birds return to the trees. The forest reclaims what stone cannot hold. Until one day, a visitor comes. She is young, a foreigner, tired, carrying grief in the tightness of her shoulders and the way she clutches a folded photo in her hand. She arrives at dusk, alone. The sun bleeds behind her as she climbs the crumbling steps, her eyes wide, hopeful, her silence not yet chosen but offered. She reads the old sign half buried in vines. She bows respectfully and steps inside. The monastery greets her, softly. The main hall is empty, open to the wind. A few monks sit in stillness at the far end, strangely unmoving, their faces hidden beneath hoods. She's given a room, a robe, and a candle, a single instruction written in red ink on yellowed parchment. Observe. At night, she cannot sleep. The silence is too heavy. She walks through the corridor barefoot, her candle flickering against the paper walls. And then she sees her at the far end of the hallway, seated in the shadows, back straight, head bowed, still. A woman in a black robe, unmoving, not breathing, not blinking, just watching. The visitor stops. She feels it, the pull, the quiet, the weight of everything unspoken. And in that moment she knows, this is the monk, the one who never left, the one who stayed behind to hold the silence, not as punishment, but as sacrifice. Sita sits beneath the broken archway, eyes open. She has not moved in weeks, maybe years. Her skin is pale, untouched by time. Her lips never part, not for prayer, not for pain, not for welcome. But the wind moves around her as if listening, because inside her there is still breath, a silence carved from the voices of the dead. The visitor bows. She does not speak. She does not ask. She simply lights her candle,
takes her place on the mat, closes her eyes, and breathes. And the mountain breathes with her, soft, slow, as if remembering, as if beginning again. Because silence is eternal, and there is always a new monk on the mountain.